CARE, to give you a little bit of background, because this is really our first event at Massey, is an academic activist organizing space for building projects of social change grounded in the voices of those that are systematically disenfranchised from global structures. Although CARE inaugurated our activist in residence program when the center was located in Singapore with the veteran human rights activist Prema Maki, this is our inaugural activist in residence program in New Zealand, and our goal is to have between 8 to 10 such conversations through the year. The activist in residence program at CARE builds on our ongoing partnerships with disenfranchised communities and activists, creating conversational anchors for what it is to reimagine the academe as a site for social justice. So in that way, CARE thinks about activism as a way not to reach out to communities, but rather what does it mean for activism to come into the academe and disrupt spaces of academe. The activist in residence program at CARE typically brings in an activist to spend anywhere between a week to a few months with us in conversation, usually with a particular project or a set of projects, in order to build white papers, advocacy briefs, media interventions, and activist strategies. In addition, the activist in residence typically offers workshops which Sue will be doing with us, and interaction sessions on communication strategies for creating social change. So we are very much interested in the practical work of creating interventions. The community of activists in residence then return to CARE for dialogues which we usually hold once a year on sustainable strategies for structural transformation, methods of community organizing, and tactics of change. So before we move on to the main program and I introduce our activists in residence, we would like to thank a few of our key supporters. We would like to thank the School of Communication, Journalism and Marketing, the College of Business, and the Office of the Provost for taking the bold step of supporting the work of CARE. Thanks also to our colleague, Dr. Doug Ashwell, Associate Head of School, and Professor Stephen Croucher, Head of School, for their ongoing support for the numerous arrangements that go into organizing such conversations and events. Thanks also to the team that puts this together, to Breeze Mehta, to Nigel in the back, to Wendy here, and to Temurita Tere-Beamsley for their incredible support in putting together these events. And thank you to Professor Shiv Ganesh. Many of you are familiar with him, who actually introduced CARE to the conversations in New Zealand. And thank you to our audience for joining us in this conversation. What a pleasure it is to welcome our inaugural activist on board, who actually does not need any introduction. Dr. Sue Bradford is our inaugural activist in residence at CARE, and she will be spending this week with us, but hopefully this will be the basis for a few projects that we begin to work on together. Dr. Bradford has a lifelong background in street and community activism and is an icon of community-based activist work in New Zealand. Much of her work has been in unemployed workers and beneficiaries organizations. She was a Green Member of Parliament for 10 years before going on to undertake a PhD in public policy at AUT, graduating in 2014. She has researched and written widely on social welfare, housing, employment, community development, and participatory methods, many of the key anchors for the kind of questions we engage in at CARE. Her incredible dissertation, a major left-wing think tank in Eotoria, framed the basis for the work that she then went on to do to actually set up a think tank. So this is really an excellent example of theory going into practice and engaging that conversation together. She is currently a co-chair of Kotare Trust, and Sue also is the subject of Jamie Chamberlain's recent biography, Constant Radical. So with that, Sue, I will open up the floor to you. Thank you.
Mohan. I always feel awkward when someone introduces me with my whole lifetime story, but thank you. And thanks, Doug, and actually everyone from this department who's made me feel so welcome this week. A lot of people up home in Auckland said, what on earth are you doing going to Massey Palmerston North to be an activist in residence? None of us had ever heard of such a thing before in Aotearoa, New Zealand, but I'm honoured and privileged to be in here for this week, and we've already had many useful conversations, not only with Mohan but with other people, including those of you who came last night to the welcome upstairs. It's great to be here. So kia ora koutou, and Mohan has given me this rather small topic to talk about today. This is my life work really. So trying to constrict it down into something that makes sense now in Aotearoa 2018. What I'm going to do is first use some of my own history as context. I hope you don't think that's crook, but I'm one of those people that always believes unless we can textualise what we're talking about, it becomes meaningless, and I don't like the abstract. I'm also going to look at how I think we can make change and how the groups I've worked with have made change and continue to try and do so. A little about the relationship between working inside Parliament and outside, because obviously that's something I'm acutely aware of, having been very much on both sides of that divide. And finally, just a few thoughts about where we need to go from here, and of course, what do we mean by we? So this is a university, so I feel the need to make a reflexive statement because I never make assumptions about definitions or about who we might be or who I am. When I wrote my thesis that Mohan referred to, I did that work between 2011 and 2014. As part of that thesis, I had the lovely task of defining left, because it was a core aspect of my thesis. Any supervisors here will know what happens to the core student. Actually, students might know as well. You go down a rabbit hole of definition. I spent 3 months on this. Going further, but I'm sure some of you will have had similar experiences with other aspects of definition writing. So the definition I came to after 3 months, a commitment to working for a world based on values of fairness, inclusion, participatory democracy, solidarity and equality, into transforming Aotearoa into a society grounded in economic, social, environmental and political justice. So trying to encapsulate both the international aspect of being left alongside the need to be Indigenous to this place. It was what I could do at the time, but for me it stands. And so that's where I stand, that's the kaupapa I work from. I totally acknowledge that people in this room and all around the country are in many other political places. But this is where I and the groups that I've worked with over many, many years, this is the place we've started from. It's our kaupapa or core belief. Not to say that there can't be many conflicts in terms of how that plays out. And that's part of our problem on the left. So just going to my own background a little, as Mohan said, and probably some of you know we've been around for a while in this country, I first really became known politically for my work in the unemployed workers movement in the 1980s and 90s. I was part of a group of unemployed people and beneficiaries who set up the Auckland Unemployed Workers' Rights Centre in 1983. Some of you will be old enough to remember Rob Muldoon. Unemployment had just risen past 100,000 people at that time, which now looks like nothing. But at that moment, people felt like it was a real crisis. We hadn't known unemployment at that level in our generation. We called a public meeting in Karangahape Road in Auckland, and over 100 people came who were so concerned about this dreadful problem of unemployment. And if we called such a meeting now, probably no one would come because we just accept it. But back then it was seen as a real disgrace, and many people were struggling with it. And from that meeting we set up this organisation, and little did I know that I would basically spend the next 16 years of my life working in this area. Our core kaupapa was what sounds really simple: jobs and a living wage for all, whether we're in work or out of work, alongside access to training and education, free and quality, that leads us to jobs that we want to do, decent jobs. So once you pull that jobs and a living wage for all apart, it becomes quite a substantial political call. So our purpose was to advocate for that in every way we could, but also to provide individual casework advocacy for beneficiaries and unemployed people struggling at that time at the interface with the Department of Labour and the Department of Social Welfare. So that's a place we started from. But as the years went by, and everyone who's older here or comes from Aotearoa will remember Roger Douglas in the 1980s, and the decimation of our public sector, of hundreds of thousands of jobs lost. And things kept getting worse through that time, and by the late 80s, early 90s, the benefit cuts under Shipley and so on, we felt like to have any political credibility at all with our demonstrations, our occupations, our street actions, our media work and so on, we actually had to do more for the people that we were working with and who were part of us. Mothers who couldn't afford to take their children to the doctor, who were going hungry just to feed their children. These were levels of poverty we hadn't seen in Auckland before. And so we sat down and thought, what credibility do we have to go out politically and fight so hard if we don't actually really try to do more, genuinely do more, with and for the people we work with? And over a period, we developed the idea of people centres. We started with one, but ended up with three, one in central Auckland, and one in Mangere and one in Manurewa, in South Auckland, deep areas of deep poverty. And in return for $10 a month, the whole family got access to all these services. Probably the most significant was a medical, full doctor service, and all these other things. As soon as we set up the medical, people asked us why we weren't doing dental. But of course, we weren't dentists. How do you set up a dental practice? It felt insurmountable, but we found a dentist who, strangely enough, had offered his services to the local University Students Association, and they turned him down. So we grabbed him with both arms, and he came in for 6 months as a volunteer and established a dental surgery for us. And from that, of course, it blossomed because the need is so huge. We had to charge people for that, but it was as low as we could make it. And it's a little known thing, I think, but John Tamahere, we used to be working in the same networks up there with John Tamahere and other Ropu people and Ropu Māori. And he actually got the idea for Waipareira Trust from us. So it was an unusual, it's usually us getting ideas from Māori side, but in this case, the seed of what became Waipareira, and then later Willie Jackson and June Jackson and Muma actually came out of our initial work here. But I don't usually talk about that, but I think it's quite interesting in terms of the intertwining histories of this kind of effort. So through the 90s, we ran the three people centres, but we maintained the political wing, the Unemployed Workers' Rights Centre, as our political and educational base, with an intensification of political action from 91 onwards. A critical aspect of this work is that we believed really strongly in autonomous people's organisations. The People's Centre was run by its own members, so the family would join, but every person would have the right to vote at the AGM for the board that ran the People's Centres. So it was a people's run organisation. It wasn't run by any external personal body. The services wings that provided all these different services were strengthened by the skills and experience of the people from the Unemployed Rights Centre. And in 1999, the Rights Centre closed for a whole lot of reasons. The People's Centres kept going. We tried to institutionalise it to the point that we thought it would survive. But sadly, over those few years, they gradually declined to the point they had to close, and that's a whole other sad story. But I think the key lesson from that is that without that strong political analysis, without the skills and experience of the Unemployed Rights Centre people, the People's Centres just became a service organisation without the beating heart of the political purpose and kaupapa. Through the 90s, we also, another long story which I won't go into, but we're also part of developing this organisation, Kotari Research and Education for Social Change. From all the networks we were in at that time, not just unemployed workers and beneficiaries, but other networks like student activists, trade unionists, people on the progressive side of the faith and church traditions, cultural workers working with drama and art and music, many people working in the environmental area, treaty workers. We came together because we felt that there was a need for a place outside the formal academy, outside the formal school system, outside the WEA and other adult education places, where people from what was by then becoming an older generation, even older now, an older generation of activists, to pass on our skills and experience to new generations, to foster and nurture leadership, to try and pass on skills of analysis, skills of change, using Freirean methods. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Freire.
But we also very much looked to Highlander School in Tennessee, America, a place that was set up in the 1930s. How many people have heard of Highlander? Anyone? Carl? Wow. They're still going really strongly. They were set up in the 1930s to train people for leadership. They started with a focus on the union struggle in the southern states of America, where union leaders used to get shot for organising, so very, very front-on struggle. They moved into training people in the struggle around civil rights, and people like Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks were trained at Highlander. People don't just become leaders. They're inspired and trained. Later on, Highlander played a key role in supporting groups working in the Appalachians in the struggle around coal mining and the environment, and so on and so on. So we look to them as well as Paulo Freire and other pedagogical guides to try and apply this but indigenise it to Aotearoa. So by 1999, the Unemployed Rights Centre was part of establishing the school at Hoteo North, which is up near Welsford, about an hour's drive north of Auckland. And Kōtari Trust is still going now, and that's the group that I currently work for part-time. So in 1999, much to my surprise, I found myself a member of that first cohort of 7 Green MPs. Rod Donald and Jeanette Fitzsimons were our co-leaders. Very exciting time. We'd never expected to get there. We went in there to change the world. It was a very different Green Party. Well, that's how it feels to me. A very different Green Party back then to what it's become these days. There were people like myself and Nandor Tansosh, who'd come very much from a street activist background. And the Green Party had accepted us as standing with them for Parliament, which Nandor and I felt was quite extraordinary, actually. And I'll never forget in 2000 when the Green Party caucus actually instructed us, Nandor and me, to go to Melbourne to join the demonstrations against the World Economic Forum on the streets of Melbourne as Green Party MPs. And so there we were, right on the front line. We got stomped by those Victorian cops. I got hurt. And they were amazing demonstrations, but that a political party in New Zealand would actually do that and have media coverage coming back every day about the Green MPs out on the streets at the barricades. It was a very different Green Party. The reason why I accepted Rod Donald's invitation to join the Green Party and stand for Parliament took me 3 months to decide, because I thought I would never go. By then I would never go back, or I'd never go into parliamentary politics. But I'd become quite disillusioned, really, with a lot of people inside Parliament and inside other places of power who would always say, "Good on you, Sue, you're out there getting arrested, you're out there getting beaten up by the cops, you're out there doing the people's centres." And but they themselves just had these really comfortable lives. They were in the places of power. I was knocking on the door of power, trying to make change, and the people in power never wanted to listen to us. We were just the rugged, ragged unemployed. So I accepted Rod's invitation, joined the Green Party, and went to Parliament with the goal of trying to become a minister in areas like housing, employment or welfare, where I and we could really make change. That's what I went to Parliament to try and do. Instead of just being seen as this, I'll pat you on the head as a good activist out here, earning very little or no money, struggling to bring up 5 children, and the chance of going inside to make change and actually try and do a little for my family for once. So there's quite a personal motivation in there as well. I had the 3 private members' bills that succeeded in one term of Parliament, and the struggle around Section 59, protecting children from assault, I think is probably the most significant thing I've ever been part of, because it helped change the culture of this country in terms of how we treat children. I did my best in there, the Green Party did its best, but we were never part of government, and of course I never became a minister. I resigned in 2009 after losing a co-leadership election to Materia Ture, which is a whole nother story. And in the months after that, I wasn't happy, and it's very hard. I always thought you should never spit the dummy. If you stand for leadership, you live by the sword, die by the sword. But at the same time, I'd felt through that process that the Green Party's direction had really pulled away from the direction I wanted to go, and the people around me out here. So I ended up leaving the Green Party and leaving the Parliament and going back to the Parliament of the streets. So just a brief reflection from my experience both inside and outside the beast, where it works. And this photo here, I actually love this picture because it's a photo of Catherine Delahunty. I don't know if anyone knows her. She recently stepped out of Parliament after 9 years as a Green MP. She comes from Thames Coromandel. She's really good at this relationship between Parliament and the people outside, and you can almost see it in the photo. This is a select committee hearing room. You can see that the select committee's been sitting there, but she's sitting down afterwards with some people who came to make a submission to that select committee, and she's talking with them and listening to them. She's not just giving them the 10 minutes formally. She's actually sitting there and talking with the people, and that's what I think it's all about when you're an MP, from any party, any political background in that place of power. So treating other people with mutual respect, actually genuinely respecting the people that come to make representations to you as an MP. I didn't do much of this back in the day before I even went to Parliament. I didn't do much lobbying because I hated going and begging people, like sort of being submissive and begging people for something. But I'll never forget one time I went to a Labour MP's office, and I thought she would be sympathetic and on side. And I went in and I was all dressed up in my pitiful best clothes, and I was trembling because I was going into Parliament because I'd never been inside like that before. And she just sat there in her very nice clothes and she just talked for half an hour, and I got about 2 minutes in. And I just went away feeling shattered and thinking, how arrogant. Like, she didn't want to hear anything that I said. Why was I there? Why was I putting myself through that? And so when I became an MP, I vowed never to be like that. And some of them are still like that. You go and make an appointment with them and they'll just talk to you, and you're lucky to get a few minutes in edgeways. Much less listen to what you're really trying to say. So, so my recipe for this from an MP, actually from both sides, that there's a willingness to listen to each other and work to really understanding what each other is saying. Because often people on the outside don't understand how Parliament works and don't understand what MPs face either. MPs need to understand the reality of union and community-based organisations, that usually our resources are pitiful, are far fewer. We are not in a position of power. We don't share the resource base, which weakens us hugely. And that from the community group and union side, I think there's often issues about groups not understanding how they need to advocate really sharply and well when advocating to power. Sometimes they present in a really confusing way, and of course the MPs just, the ears close. So there is some responsibility on groups and unions to lobby well, but that's a whole, you do whole university courses on that, and I think some of you teach them. After I left Parliament, as I said, I went back out on the street and became part of setting up this new unemployed worker and beneficiary group, because there had been nothing in between and things had only got worse in this country. We had no unemployed and beneficiary group in Auckland. So a big group of us worked for months. We took 6 months to work on our kaupapa, just the kaupapa alone, and set up this group which I remained very involved in for about 6 years. Again, starting from scratch. I never thought I'd go back to this work, but I did. Starting from scratch with this mix of individual casework advocacy, now with work and income, and taking political action. And that group, of course, was helped in its established by the fact that some of us did come from that older generation of activists, so we brought some experience with us, but there were many, many younger people involved too, and still are. The other big experiment I was part of in this zone was mana. Some of you, even more of you will remember mana, because this is a lot more recent, launched by Hone Harawira and Annette Sykes in 2011 in Auckland. Māori-led, Māori-focused on a tino rangatiratanga kaupapa. For the first time in my life, Māori Rōpū invited tauiwi, that is non-Māori, to become part of the rōpū, genuinely become part of it, and join together in the struggle for common purpose. And for people like me, this was incredible. I never dreamed something like that would happen. So exciting. So some of us went in boots and all. And in that first year in 2011, I was actually, much to my amazement, I had to, in standing for election for mana, I had to go to marae right through the northern Rohe, o marae after marae to present myself as worthy of standing. In some of those hui, I was the only Pākehā in the place. I was also really involved in policy development inside mana. But after 3 years, anyone from Aotearoa will know what happened. The multi-billionaire crook, I don't mind saying that, Kim.com, and offered mana money, and they took it. And their mana, I think their mana, I knew that this would destroy mana, and it did. But I couldn't stay around. I left. At the same time as I was involved with Auckland Action Against Poverty and mana, I was also doing the PhD, which I won't talk about here, tempting as it might be. You can find it online. Now, in this time now, in the last few years, it can be very depressing in this country, and I think around the world, to be politically conscious and politically active. Neoliberal capitalism has managed to entrench itself ever more powerfully, including inside the universities and other institutions. We all know about climate change, the rich-poor gap. From the point of view of myself and the people I work with, we see Labour and Labour-led governments as really a slightly kinder face of the same political and economic drivers. And when thinking about treaty relationships and the history of this country and where we might go constitutionally if we really see te treaty as meaning something, there's a real lack of non-Māori response to the huge efforts that have been made on Māori's side, including by people like Veronica Tāwhai on this campus. The massive work done to envision new ways of working together politically in this country, genuine constitutional reform. But the taui we left has been really poor at picking up that challenge as well, leaving it to Māori. Oh, Māori know best, we'll just leave it to Māori. But actually we have a responsibility too. So the people that I continue to work with and live with and act with, hope, we're always thinking of ways that we can try and, even in this depressing time, how we can keep taking action that's useful and meaningful. In my life, in this history I've just given will show it. This isn't my theory, it's an old theory that's been around a long time, but in some ways I've lived the reality of it, that there are three main ways of creating change in our lives. From outside the system, throwing rocks, demonstrations, occupations, frontline activism. The long march inside the institutions, which I guess most of you are engaged in here at Massey. Or the long march inside local government or council or the National Parliament or in the public service. There's lots of places we can make change, and people are. And thirdly, the third way, building our own organisations, and that's why I've given these examples, so you can see that I'm not just talking theory here. These are methods that we and myself and others have been using as people do all around the world. Building our own organisations inside a rotten system. And for those that don't know, this organisation, UniMig, is the Union of Migrant Workers, which is a really vibrant organisation in Auckland, and I think they're reaching out elsewhere now as well, that's working to protect and unionise and beat off the worst parts of exploitation down to the level of slavery of some of the migrant workers that now live in our country, who are often in the most vulnerable and exploited situations. And I just think it's fantastic to see migrant workers organising themselves with the backing of one of our big private sector unions first, to set up their own organisations and carry on their own struggle. So that's an example of, in a different area, of people doing this, building our own organisations. Some of the dangers I've seen, particularly as someone from the Green Party background and the sort of people that we Greens mix with, is that some people in the green world will say, well, actually, what are you on about, Sue? Why do you talk about driving up contradictions and challenging Parliament? And they think that actually what we should do is focus on reaching the highest level of consciousness in our own selves, and that if we all do that, then the whole world will change. Nothing wrong with wanting to achieve higher consciousness, but I question whether that in itself ever changes the world. And then this obvious... had a few problems in the Greens. If we recycle, if we garden, if we buy all these wonderful things, they're all really important, but will they change the structures of injustice? What happens for the people that are still living, who are still homeless in Mangere and all over this country, etc.? or even with things like transition towns, slow food, farmers markets, community gardens, all this is all really good, but people like me will say that's never enough. Yes to all that, but we need more than that. And I won't bang on about it because it's pretty obvious, but I just love this banner at the front of the big climate justice march in Paris. Change the system, not the planet. That's taking it to the ultimate. That's our paramount task now. So what does it mean in terms of making all this real? One of the things that as the years go by, and I don't know if we have any radical geographers here in the room, but when I was doing my thesis, I started reading a few geographers who I'd never read before and found they really talk about this a lot, but it's something we'd always found out in practice, that having secure physical bases from which to operate, like the people centres or like Kotari Trust has its own building, First Union and that union, Unimeg Union, have their own building. Having your own physical space, preferably owned but even rented, where you can control your environment, where you can be there long term. It allows all these things to happen. Relationships can deepen over time. You can do all sorts of different things in a shared space like that. Not just hire the local church hall to have a meeting. You can develop, often in these spaces, new organisations are seeded by them, and we've seeded a lot from this, because you're operating without church, union, government or anyone controlling you. You're operating in this autonomous space. This is something any tangata whenua in the room will think, oh, why am I on about this? Because Māori have always known this. Māori have fought for their bases ever since the colonisers came. And due to their fighting, they retain and are rebuilding bases. But for us Pākehā, many Pākehā don't really understand this too well. But anyone that's worked in the community sector will know how weakened it's become over the last few decades, how much it's been colonised through funding and contracting, with overt control legislatively through the charities legislation, openly through saying to the health organisation, health NGOs, if you speak out against the government's policy on health, we will not fund or contract with you. So this control over the community sector in the last 30 years has become extreme. And so there are fewer and fewer autonomous organisations. So the need to seed the idea of it and to build them again is enormous from where I stand. And beyond that, in taking action, these are some of the things I think are imperative, that we understand truly our situation, our context and our history, that we're prepared to deeply analyse and understand what's going on, not just operate on the surface. And actually this is where the academy sometimes helps with theory, because sometimes activists on the ground are prone to just denying the use of theory or very hostile to it, when in fact we all need theory wherever we are, and academics are well placed to help with that if they can do it well. There's a big argument often on the left between reform or revolution. I don't know if any of you have been enough in the left to know about that. I know you will have, some friends in the front row here. But there's, through history, forever there's been this debate, reform or revolution. Do we make small reforms now, or do we just put all our hope in fighting for a transformative future? I wait for the revolution to come. You might guess by now I actually believe in both. I believe that we do need to always be ready to make change now, because otherwise it's actually a waste of time. We can only work for a better future if we're prepared to make change, but always with our eye on the future, on a vision of a society that's quite different. So we need both. we need progressive reforms, but with an eye to a transformed future. And then finally, in all our work, or a lot of our work, we've always seen the use and have tried to do our best to use what we call cultural work, like music, drama, art, banner making, many forms of it, creating our own new cultural forms and cultural experience as part of this. And if we don't do all these things, nothing will change, really, in a fundamental way, from the kaupapa I started talking about. And if we don't do these things and have the strength to do them and the clarity to do them, we will always be at the risk of co-option and colonisation from other forces stronger than us. So, moving forward, we have to have hope, because otherwise we may as well go home. And it's hard at all times in our lives, being prepared to go beyond what we know now and what we can conceive of now, like instigating and stimulating each other to go past our comfort zones, to argue, like with one friend here, to be prepared to talk to people from right across the political spectrum or from other parts of society that you're not used to talking to try and stimulate the thinking and the struggles that you're in. I've always accepted invitations to speak from any group, even ones that would seem like the enemy. Like I'll never forget going to speak to the Young National Party at Tongariro one time from the Unemployed. And like I was down among all these young nats, and they were all men except for one. And one of the young men stood up at the end of my speech and he says, "I've been to many meetings, but I've never been to one where I disagreed with every single word the speaker said." But I'm still prepared to do that because I think that often you never know what's going to happen in those situations, and you never know what sudden sparks are made across things that you think are boundaries. So I'll always go to churches or to places that people like me wouldn't normally be seen as going, because I think that's often where the most interesting synergies come. So that's part of transformation as well, crossing those borders. Obviously, from my political position, the need to go beyond the ethics of individuality and the cult of individualism, to think back to what it means to have commons, things in common, and the worth of that, beyond market solutions. This is hard for a lot of people to get their heads around that. Politics in New Zealand isn't always going to be like it is now. Politics never is. Nothing ever is. Everything always changes. And if we take a lead in actively trying to change it, we can actually do it and look at all the changes that have happened. Because people, a small group of people, whether it was the women's vote or anything else, it's happened because some people chose to take action on that. We need leadership, more and stronger leadership, both in the struggle inside Parliament and outside and outside the universities. I call it enabling leadership a leadership that supports other people to become leaders, isn't all about yourself, or isn't just completely hierarchical, charismatic, I'm the leader. But a leadership that works with others to build organisation and make change. Like I was talking about, transcending traditional boundaries between different ones of us, where there's a common purpose. But it is up to each of us, it's on us if we wish to act, but then to find others. One of the saddest things I've always found in my life, back in the days when people wrote letters, I was always getting letters from, particularly, I think they were older white men, and they'd be writing long, long letters, and they were really sad and angry about some issue, and they'd always ending up, "Now, Sue, you should organise a demonstration on this, or you should take action." And I was saying, how dare they? Don't they understand? I'm angry about something. It is my job to work with you, who might also be angry about this. Together we can build a group, together we can make change. But to act, just be angry and sad on your own, never doesn't do anyone any good, and of course there's heaps of that on the internet now. In the social media, that's a whole other story. But yeah, unless we're willing to cooperate and work with others for a common purpose, no change will happen. Finally, we need to be brave and full of hope. Kia ora.